All right, so it's 6 o'clock now, and so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first session of our Learn Your Land webinar series. My name is Sean Carroll. I am a environment and energy resource educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension. Welcome to everyone. We have, I think, 75 people registered for this, so pretty good turnout from all over Dutchess County, the Hudson Valley, even from some other towns upstate New York and from Connecticut as well. So great to have you all with us. This is the first time we're kind of doing this webinar format session, so bear with us as there's sure to be a hiccup or two here as we go along. Just want to, for anyone who hasn't really used the Zoom kind of format before for these webinars, just wanted to encourage you to use and keep an eye on the chat window and feel free to type questions into there. We'll always have one of our panelists kind of monitoring that, so please let me know if you have any questions. So with that, just kind of introduce the outline for the webinar series as a whole. As again, this is a 3-part webinar series. Tonight, and then we'll be doing 2 more sessions the next coming 2 weeks. So next Tuesday, the 9th, and the following Tuesday, the 16th. And here's just kind of an overview of what we'll be covering. You hopefully all received an email from me with the agenda and some kind of homework to do beforehand. Let me know if at the end of the webinar, if anyone hasn't been receiving those emails, and I'll be sure to add you to that list. Also, in that email I sent out was a link to this, this page, which is our CCEDC website. Another way to, probably the easiest way to access it is just to go to our CCE Dutchess homepage. And on that front page there, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see right there in the middle, the spotlight for Learn Your Land webinar series. And that page will have all the information you'll need. It'll have links to all the homework, to all these presentations, and this is being recorded. So these sessions will be viewable in the near future. So I encourage you to maybe bookmark that page so you have it for future reference as well. So before we get started, oh, and Michelle just sent that, put that link down in the chat box too, so you'll have quick access to that. Thank you, Michelle. So before we get started, just wanted to give a quick introduction to Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, and who we are and what we do. So CCEDC is a subordinate governmental agency associated with Cornell University and its land grant mission since 1869. And we provide research-based resources, tools, and education for the residents and officials of Dutchess County. Our association is comprised of 4 main program areas. Myself and several of my other colleagues here belong to the Environment and Energy program, but we also have great programming coming from our Agriculture and Horticulture program, Family and Consumer Education, and also our 4-H and Youth Development program, which many of you might be familiar with. And then I also just wanted to acknowledge that funding for this program comes from Dutchess County, and we're grateful that they were kind of flexible. This was supposed to be an in-person training, but obviously in light of current events, we had to switch up and do it on the fly a little bit. So grateful for their flexibility, and we thank you guys all as well for sticking with us. So with that, I just wanted to turn it over real quick to my supervisor, Carolyn Clocker. She just had a quick statement to make in light of some other current events we have.
Hello, everyone. As Sean said, my name is Carolyn Clocker, and I am the Environment and Energy Program Leader at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County. And before we start tonight's program, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge recent events occurring in our nation. As stewards of both the land and our communities, We felt it would be completely remiss and insensitive if we did not recognize the trauma and pain Black men and women in our communities are experiencing due to racist violence and senseless killing. To quote Cornell's president in an earlier statement that he released to the Cornell community, "Decent people and institutions cannot stand silent while such violence against our fellow citizens continues." So while diversity and inclusion has always been a principle of both the Environment and Energy team and Cornell Cooperative Extension Dutchess County on the whole, we recognize that there is so much more that we need to be doing. We are still working out what that looks like for our team, but some of our ideas include increased training on diversity and inclusion, making an effort to include Black and people of color who are experts in their field as presenters on future forums and workshops like this one, and so much more. And I share these actions and ideas that we've been discussing, at least amongst our Environment and Energy Program team, with you to encourage you to think about and discuss actions that each of you can take in your communities and your own lives. This could include working with others in your community to increase the diversity of your municipal boards and committees. It could be encouraging similar conversations like the ones that we're having among coworkers, family, and friends. It could include listening to and amplifying Black voices, experts, and leaders in our communities, and just so much more. And what I'll say is we don't pretend to be the experts on this. We know that we have so much more to do, but we would like to encourage you to join us in these efforts and this important work. So if you have ideas of actions that we as individuals, as communities, or organizations can take, I would encourage you to share them in the chat box, and be sure you click on send to presenter and all attendees, because I think we could all benefit from hearing these ideas and these actions over the next few minutes. Or feel free to get in touch with members of the Environment and Energy team after tonight's webinar. So thank you again for joining us tonight. I echo Sean's and the rest of the team's thanks. And at this time, I'll turn it back over to tonight's presenters.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Appreciate that. Great. So let's start the evening off. Just wanted to give a quick overview of what we'll be covering tonight. So tonight's session will be focusing primarily on kind of the ecological principles and stewardship. So kind of we're starting from a larger kind of holistic vision of what we're trying to get to, and then we'll slowly start bringing that down into a more focused discussion and activity as we get towards the end of these sessions. So just wanted to kind of take a few minutes to introduce ourselves as presenters, give an overview of who this whole group is, since we'll be spending the next 3 weeks together. Then I'll turn it over to Julie Hart, who will give an introduction to land conservation and stewardship. We'll take a 5-minute stretch break. We're going to be here for 2 hours, so I want to make sure you guys can get up and get a glass of water or something in the meantime. We're going to intersperse these sessions with some polls to try to keep it as kind of interactive and hands-on as possible. And then I'll turn it over to Michelle Gluck, who will lead us through a little property management brainstorm activity. And then finally, I'll introduce kind of some of the homework for tonight. Again, these homework in strong quotations, they're more activities for you to take part in, you know, either with your family or by yourself in between these sessions, just to kind of continue along with what we're covering and get you, keep you active in the conversation. So, and then also one other thing I just wanted to mention, Julie will be kind of giving a good overview of this tonight, but keep this question in mind as we go along tonight. What does it mean to be a steward? So real quick, who our presenters are for the 3 sessions. Myself, I introduced myself, but I'd like to introduce Michelle Gluck and Julie Hart, who are going to be presenting tonight as well. Michelle is a resource educator with our Environment and Energy program here, and Julie Hart is the Senior Manager of Stewardship and Education at the Dutchess Land Conservancy. And then over the next 2 weeks, we'll get to know Nate, Beth, Mike, and Joyce as well. So you all answered a few registration questions, and I thought it would be useful to share these with you all so we could kind of get a sense of who everyone is here. So the majority of you are landowners. We do have a good amount of Conservation Advisory Council or Conservation Board members in here, which is great. Glad to have you guys all here. And then a smattering of a few others, conservation organizations, a few students, so that's great. Thought it was interesting. How many acres do you manage? We had a mix kind of all over the board. The majority were small landowners, significant amount of less than 1 and 1 to 5 acres. But then we also did have a few people in the 100 plus acreage. So that could be that they have, they manage several different properties, or they have a larger property that they're managing. So a good mix. Glad to see that. And we'll try to be as inclusive as possible as we go along and have recommendations for all different scales for that. Where everyone's from, I kind of broke this out into to Dutchess County and then everywhere else. So a good mix. Glad to see some great Dutchess County representation, but also it's awesome to see we got people from all over the Hudson Valley, even a few folks from Connecticut, Long Island, and upstate New York. So welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us. The last thing we have here is just what I asked. We asked what types of properties you all manage primarily, and most of you had forest or woodlot on your property, as well as gardens. A good amount obviously had some manicured lawns, but it was good to see also some of these other less known ones, or less common ones rather, wetland, meadow, stream, pond, and then a few people managing some agricultural property as well. So great to see that all. All right, with that, I wanted to, so we asked this question in the registration, but I thought it would be good for everyone to kind of to see the results of this as well. So if you could take a couple minutes to answer this poll. 3 questions. First, what is your primary management goal for your property or the properties you're considering? The second, aside from this goal, what other goals might you have for your property, and feel free to select any that apply. And then finally, what challenges do you foresee potentially having or experiencing in the past, or you have experienced in the past that might be a barrier to achieving these goals? So take a few minutes and answer those. I'm not seeing anyone. Oh, there we go. Now there's a couple going in. All right, we got a few. So it looks like some people are having some difficulty, but it looks like the answers are coming in now. So I'm having a few people say submit button doesn't work. So I'm not sure why that would be happening. Maybe give it a second. Oh yeah, maybe it might be happening because there's 3 questions. So make sure you fill out all 3 questions and then hit submit. I wonder if that's maybe the issue. Oh, I'm sorry, there's actually 4 questions. And then the 4th question, do you own, rent, or lease property that you manage? So yeah, please make sure you answer all 4 of those questions and then hit submit. That should hopefully fix the problem. Okay, we're getting a few answers in from the chat box too. Great. So we'll take 30 more seconds here. Yep. If people can't figure out how to get down to all 4 questions, there is a little slider on the right side of the poll box, and you should be able to use your mouse to scroll down for that. All right. Oh, no problem. Sorry, I should have been a little more clear about that. So yeah, the questions are all in a row in the same box. So it looks like most people are getting it now. So it'll take just about 15 more seconds. All right. So let's see. So the primary management goal for your property, let's see, it looks like the majority of you are interested in removal or management of invasive plants and increasing native plants. That's great. Again, a lot of you are interested in attracting wildlife, pollinators. We got a few gardeners here. You interested in timber or firewood production. Great. For other secondary goals, yep, kind of all over the board again as well. Pollinators seems to be another popular one. General aesthetics and or stewardship, great, glad to see that. Let's see, in terms of challenges, the majority of you said economic or physical constraints, right? Money or time, understandable. Sure, some of you have ecological constraints. Lack of knowledge, good, okay. Well, hopefully this session will help to alleviate that challenge a little bit. And yeah, great, so the vast majority of you are owners. Okay, good to know. All right. Thank you all, and thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully the next one will go a little smoother. All right, so with that, I'd like to get into kind of the meat and potatoes of our evening tonight, and I'd like to introduce Julie Hart. As I mentioned, Julie is the Senior Manager of Stewardship and Education at the Dutchess Land Conservancy, and she's been a great colleague and partner of CCEDC, and we're really glad to have her here again. And with that, Julie, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll stop sharing and let you get in there.
All right. Let me. All right. All right, can everybody see that?
Looks great, Julie.
And you can hear me okay?
You sound, yep, loud and clear.
All right, great. So as I'm going through my introductory slides, if you could type into the chat box, what do you think it means to be a steward of the land now that you've had some time to think about that? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but I'm going to start with a basic introduction to the Dutchess Land Conservancy and Land Trust and what we do. So my name is Julie Hart. My title is the Senior Manager of Stewardship and Education, which probably doesn't really explain what I do, but we try. It's a lot of big words for one job title. So to us, stewardship is working with landowners who care for their conservation easement protected properties. And education is doing things like this program, as well as working with landowners, directly educating them about their land. So I'll start with some basic overviews here. I think a lot of you probably know what a land trust is, but let's go through the basics. It's a nonprofit that as their goal is to actively conserve land by undertaking or assisting in conservation easement acquisition and by stewardship of that land and easements. So there's that word stewardship again. We're going to come back to that, and I want you to remember that one. Different land trusts have different overarching goals. And some land trusts might focus on trails or preserves, and others might focus on protecting farmland or working with landowners on conservation easements. At the DLC, we do focus a lot on farmland. And our main focus is to work with landowners who wish to place conservation easements on their land. So if you're not familiar with a conservation easement, this is a quick overview of them. It's a voluntary legal agreement that permanently protects the land for conservation purposes by limiting future development. It doesn't prohibit development, it just limits the development that can take place on that piece of land in order to protect the natural resources. So these are flexible tools. We work individually with every landowner to negotiate their conservation easement. We ask them to think about their vision for the future of their property, and we examine the natural resources that exist on the land and decide how best to tailor the conservation easement so that those resources are protected while allowing the landowner enough flexibility to still have a viable property. So this is something we have a lot of experience with. Dutchess Land Conservancy has been around since the mid-80s, and we hold over 400 conservation easements in lands in and around Dutchess County. So there's a lot of different conservation organizations out there. And one thing to keep in mind is that it's a very, very collaborative group of organizations. These are all groups that we've worked with in various capacities over the years. You're probably well acquainted with national organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the Trust for Public Land, regional organizations, and our local land trusts as well. And so we all work together. It's a very, very collaborative line of work. All of these organizations have similar goals, and we work together very, very effectively to protect land and to keep those natural resources and those lands operational and protecting the resources for future generations. And unless you think this all happens in a vacuum, of course it doesn't. We have a lot of guidance. The Land Trust organization, the Land Trust Alliance is a national organization that provides support, and they're a leader in policy, standards, education, and training for land trusts. So we have standards and practices which are across the nation. All land trusts are utilizing these same policies and procedures. There's an accreditation system whereby a land trust can go through what I will describe as a lengthy process to become accredited, where all of your policies and procedures are reviewed. You go through a very, very extensive process. But land conservation doesn't happen in a vacuum. We don't have rogue organizations around here. Everybody is working together and with oversight. So that's a quick primer on land trusts and what they do. Now I'm going to launch into the main part of the presentation. So this word stewardship, this was in my job title, this was in a description of land trust. This is a very common word, and I want to take a few minutes to think about what that word means. Now the dictionary definition is the responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. So that's a nice enough definition. It covers a lot of ground, but let's think about that in context. Now, the slide that you're seeing right now is the emblem of the Haudenosaunee Nation, which is better known as the Iroquois Confederacy. And the text is from their Thanksgiving address, the greetings to the natural world. This is something that I like to go back to. Oops, sorry about that. It's a fairly extensive address, and they go through all the different forms of life and the different ways that the land provides for the people. And this is the beginning part of it. This is the opening few sentences. Today we have gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as a people. Now our minds are one. And I wanted to start with that just because the Native peoples are the original stewards of our land and lived in this area for many thousands of years. And so when we're talking about the stewardship of our lands, we need to remember that we are the current stewards of these lands, but there have been many stewards in the past and there will be many in the future. So think of yourself as part of that continuum of land stewards, taking learning from the past and passing it on to the future. Now, this is a quote that I think is particularly appropriate in these times from Terry Tempest Williams. Perhaps the most radical thing we can do is to stay at home so we can learn the names of the plants and animals around us so that we can begin to know what tradition we're part of. And people have been doing a lot more staying at home lately than they have in the past. And it's interesting, I've been talking to people who, because they are, quote unquote, stuck at home so much, they have been noticing more than they used to. The spring is still popping out all around us. And I've talked to people who are noticing the birds and the plants a lot more than they had in past years. And so while it is a very difficult time, I see it also as an opportunity for us to be able to connect better with the land where we live. So what does it mean to be a steward of the land? I can't see the chat boxes. Are there any comments in there?
Yeah, we got a bunch of great ones. Got some keywords, you know, considering themselves part of a larger team. Stewardship implies care, preserving, remediating, healthy ecosystems, not anthropocentric, but encourages biodiversity. Yeah, a bunch of great answers.
Awesome. Wonderful. That gives us a lot to chew on for the rest of the presentation. So all of those things, that's a wonderful insight into what it means to be a steward of the land. And we'll be talking a lot about more of those in depth tonight. So when I was thinking about what does it mean to be a steward, it struck me that, you know, we think of stewardship as a very active role. It sounds like something that involves, I don't know, chainsaws and bulldozers and lots of power tools. And maybe eventually it does. But I think before you take that active step to do whatever stewardship you choose to do, you need to connect with the land. You need to listen to it, listen to what the land is telling you, find out about its history, learn about the plants and animals that live there along with you. And as part of the next couple of sessions, we're going to be talking about that in more detail, ways that you can learn more about your land. Of course, there's an app for that. There's an app for a lot of the things that we're going to be covering. And so, you know, we live in an age of ultra connectivity and knowledge availability. You know, you don't have to look at a plant and wonder what it is anymore. You can point your cell phone camera at it and it'll tell you what it is. So there's a lot more knowledge that's available, and the trick is to learn how to use those tools and to incorporate that into your stewardship of the land. So as you're going through the process of listening, learning, and observing, you're also thinking about your planning. What is it that you'd like to do with your land? Do you like it pretty much the way it is? Are there things that you'd like to change about it? And there seems to be a lot of interest in controlling invasives and encouraging pollinators, and we'll certainly be talking more about that later. So when we talk about land stewardship, we can't leave out Aldo Leopold. I hope that you all know who Aldo Leopold is. If not, just a brief overview. He is really one of the founding fathers of conservation and conservation science. He was a professor of wildlife management back in the 30s and 40s. He cut his teeth ecologically in the Dust Bowl of the West. He dealt with huge erosion issues that were happening in the 30s and 40s. And so from that, over time, he did a lot of writing and a lot of thinking. His classic book is called the Zan County Almanac, and there are a lot of essays in there. So I'll be peppering this presentation with quotes from Aldo Leopold, so I hope you don't get tired of them. The thing is, he just says this stuff a lot better than I could. So here's our first one. The land ethic enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively, the land. Now, we have ethics that exist for all sorts of human communities. Ethics is often seen as a fairly dry and dusty discipline, but think about what a land ethic means. When humans talk about communities, they're usually talking about their human communities. And so what Leopold is telling us here is to remember there's more than humans that are here, and the land is comprised of all these different forms of life and of non-living things, the soils and the rocks that are all contributing to the nutrient cycling in any system. So the land ethic is one of his best known essays. It's kind of funny because he actually goes out of his way to say that something like a land ethic can never be written down, which is absolutely true. And then he proceeds to write a pretty lengthy essay about that. So if you have not read Aldo Leopold, and especially the land ethic essay, I certainly encourage you to go out and find that. So let's dive into this idea of the land. Now, when I think about the land, I think about its history. Every landscape that I see, and I'm very lucky to work for the Dutchess Land Conservancy, where I get to go tromping all over the place, all over Dutchess and Columbia counties. And what I find is that every landscape tells a story. And as you learn to absorb what you're seeing and translate that into historical knowledge, you find a walk in the woods gives you a lot more knowledge than just a casual stroll. There's an awful lot that you can learn just from walking the land. And I always say that, you know, before we got to a property, we look at all the maps. We look at the aerial photo and the slope map and the water map and the soils map. And you look at all those maps and you feel like you kind of understand the property, but I find that your eyes can only tell you so much. When I come back, I find that my feet can tell me a lot more about that land. It's my feet that really read the property. My eyes can read the maps, but my feet read the land. So let's talk about the history. This is a basic broad history of the Northeast, including New York. So long, long ago, at the end of the last ice age, our area was covered by the Laurentide ice sheet. And as you probably know, Long Island and Cape Cod are terminal moraines. So that was the end of the glacier. That's as far south as it went. And it just plowed a bunch of rocky junk in front of it. And that's what's left is those islands. So very, very porous materials. So the ice age drew to a close. The glaciers melted. The water ran off as gravity told it to do. You'll find water and gravity are the two most powerful forces on Earth. And as the glacier melted and receded, there was not much left except rock. It was just pretty barren at that point. Over time, simple plants, lichens came in and mosses, and they started to break down the rocks. That's what they do. And as the rocks are broken down through weathering of, you know, from the atmosphere as well as physical forces of the mosses and the lichens breaking them down, soil started to form. Now this takes quite a long time. Soil does not form quickly, and especially right after the glacier, but over time soils did start to form and simple plants started to arrive. Eventually we had, you know, grasses and forbs came in, and over many thousands of years, enough soil formed that larger plants began to come into the area. And eventually the whole Northeast and New York, and indeed most of the Eastern United States, was covered by a forest. It was a very heavily forested area. You've probably heard the old trope about the squirrel that could jump from tree to tree from Maine all the way to St. Louis. And I don't know if that was true or not, but it could have been. So during this time period, the Native Americans arrived in our area. Nobody really knows when, but we do know that they were here for a very, very long time. They had their own way of managing the land. And again, we don't know a whole lot about that. There is some evidence that they might have used fire to clear lands or to clear forest understories. It's not absolutely sure that they did. Maybe the fires were started by lightning. They're still debating that. But the Native Americans were certainly managing the land. They were hunter-gatherers and they were farmers. And that persisted for many, many thousands of years. And at a certain point in time, this is a photo of the reproduction of the Half Moon. This is Henry Hudson's ship. You know, remember he sailed up the Hudson River in, I believe it was 1609. And at that time, there weren't really a lot of settlers in our area. Some settlements were occurring along the coasts, but there weren't really a lot around here yet. This was still pretty primeval, you could say. And so when the settlers were starting to arrive, you know, around 1700, we were starting to get the land being divided up. If you're familiar with the Great Nine Partners Patent and the Little Nine Partners Patent, the Beekman Patent, all of those old agreements that were basically dividing up and giving away the lands of Dutchess County, dividing it into ownerships. That was all happening in the late 1600s and early 1700s. So our lands were being divided up. And the goal of those land grant patents was to bring people in to conquer the land, to improve it, as I think the word that gets used. And so the idea was to bring in settlers who would clear the lands and farm the lands, and you know, these were colonies at the time, and kind of start to inhabit the lands. So around 1700, things were just getting started. There weren't many settlers here, but they did start coming in. And they brought with them axes, and they brought with them chainsaws, or not chainsaws, sorry, crosscut saws like this one. And they started to cut down the forest. They needed to farm. They needed to hack their existence out of our rocky soils. And so they cut down trees, first in small areas, and then it kind of grew. And initially you would see, you know, these kind of hardscrabble homesteads carved out of the forest. And as more and more people came, more and more areas became settled. The area was very agricultural in nature, and from the 1700s into the mid 1800s or so, you had a lot of agriculture in the area, but also some extractive industries as well. And the stories of those days are still here on our road maps. If you look at Gristmill Lane, Mill Street, Mill Lane, Lime Kiln Road, Depot Lane, Creamery Lane, Dover Furnace Road, those are all remnants of these old times. There were a lot of mills. We have a lot of running water here in Dutchess County, and that's how people, you know, sawed the logs and ground their meal. And they had grist mills and sawmills all over the place. In time, the railroads came through, and even going back in time, the iron industry, the Dover furnace was an iron forge, and the hills all around there were basically cleared to make charcoal to fire those furnaces. As I understand it, some of the iron went into forging weapons for the Revolutionary War. So this history goes back quite a ways. And as this is happening, the landscape is being very heavily impacted. The trees are being cut down. Farms are going into those lands. And over time, you know, the world is kind of shifting from animal power to water power, and eventually to internal combustion engine power. And so by the middle of the 1800s, this is about as extensive as clearing got in the Northeast. So this is the lowest percentage of forest cover that existed in the Northeast in the last few thousand years, was in the middle of the 1800s. You could stand on a hilltop and not see a tree in any direction except for maybe a few hedgerows and some trees planted around the farmhouse. So it was very, very extensive clearing. In the middle of the 1800s, that's when our forest cover really bottomed out. And it's around this time that these stone walls were being built. Most of these stone walls aren't as old as you think they are. They are mostly built in the mid 1800s. And a couple of reasons why these were built: they were edging pastures and crop fields, trying to keep the cattle from intermingling with the crops, which is obviously a bad idea. And a couple reasons why these walls are so extensive. For one thing, there is a lot of rock here. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. I live in the town of Milan up in northern Dutchess County. I always like to say Milan, the town where, gee, I can't find a rock, said nobody ever. It's a very rocky place, New England, in this part of New York. So there was plenty of rock to build a wall with. But the other issue they were dealing with was that they didn't have very many trees left to build fence posts. They didn't have much forest left. The trees that they did have, they needed to build their houses and to, you know, for firewood. That was a very essential need. This was before oil furnaces. And so stone walls are extremely extensive. One estimate is that there are over 250,000 miles of stone walls in New England and New York. Now, just to put that into perspective, it is about that far to the moon. So if you laid all our stone walls end to end, you could walk to the moon. That would take a while though. So that's the mid 1800s. Now, at this time, the middle of the 1800s, the social structure in the United States is really changing a lot. And you're starting to see farmsteads being abandoned. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Farming is really hard, for one thing. Farming in the very rocky soils that tend to dominate New England and New York is one of those reasons. But also, think of what was going on in society at that time. This was the Industrial Revolution, and so factories were being built, and people were learning that you could leave your farm and get a better paying job in the city, and you didn't necessarily have to get up at 5 in the morning and milk the cows anymore. So to a lot of people, that sounded great, and people left farms in droves, and they went to the city to get jobs in factories. Other things that were happening in the early 1800s that kind of stimulated this exodus from New England farms were the Louisiana Purchase, which happened in 1803. And when it became known that there are places in the world where you can stick a shovel in the ground and not hit a rock, people thought they maybe would want to go there and try some farming. And so again, they left New England in droves and headed for the Midwest, where the soils are much more suited for farming. Other influences included the Erie Canal, which opened in 1825, and this again connected east to west. It allowed farmers in western New York and the Ohio Valley to bring their crops to the more urban areas in a more timely fashion. So it really opened up that market. And so these farms were abandoned in droves, and over time, you started to see natural succession occur. Now, natural succession is just what it sounds like. It's a natural process. When these farmlands were abandoned, gradually they were overgrown. You know, plants started to come back in, trees started to grow again, and over time, forests regrew. What's interesting is that the forests that grew back were not the same ones that were cut down. The species were a little bit different, and the species that came in first were the ones that had the seeds that are windblown. So birches, for example, are very easy to spread across the landscape. And so through the process of natural succession, we went from farm fields to old growth fields to shrubby fields to forests, and that took place over many decades. And what we have now is, you know, the forest that sprang out of that. Most of the lands in Dutchess County were cleared for farming. I think there's an estimate in an old report that says 80% of Dutchess County was cleared for farming at the end of the 1800s or thereabouts. So most of the forests that you have in Dutchess County are not original forests. These are second or even third growth forests that have come up after cleared farmlands had been abandoned. And over time, of course, these forests also are getting cut down. Now we're cutting down forests for development and other things like that. So again, the land goes through a pretty significant change. So that is a sort of a nutshell version of the last 12,000 years of history of the Dutchess County lands. And I'm going to show that to you, basically the same thing, but in a slightly different format. So here's a timeline from 12,000 years ago to the present day. The glacier retreats, soil formation begins, grasses and forbs grow, and forests come to dominate the Northeast. Over thousands and thousands of years this happens. It's a very slow process, and it took a really, really long time. But eventually the forests dominated the Northeast. It was, I don't want to use the word stable because I know the ecologists in the room would jump all over me if I tried to use the word stable, but continuous. The forests were still subject to disturbances. They still had insect pests and pathogens that would sweep through them, and the occasional hurricane and tornado and fire and so forth. But in general, the forest persisted in a relatively stable form for many, many thousands of years. The Native Americans arrived and again lived here for many thousands of years. These forests were their home. They were hunter-gatherers and they were farmers, and there were thousands and thousands of them. There were a lot of tribes in our area, a lot of them on the coast, but quite a few inland as well. The emblem that you see is actually from the Haudenosaunee, who existed mostly to the north and west of us, but they have the best emblem that I could find. The turtle, if you're not familiar with the significance of that, the creation story for most of the Eastern tribes involves Sky Woman who falls from the sky. And at the time, there was only sky and water. There was no earth. And when she fell from the sky into the water, the animals wanted to save her. And so Turtle offered his back. And many animals tried to find some mud, but the water was too deep and they couldn't get far enough down. And finally, Muskrat dove down, far, far deep, and was able to scoop some mud off the bottom, brought it up and spread it on the back of the turtle, and it grew into the land. And that's where Sky Woman lived, and she had brought seeds with her, and that's where our plants come from. And so when you hear Native Americans talking about our world, you'll hear them call it Turtle Island. And that's why, that's their creation story. And so in the middle of this turtle, you'll see the emblems of the clans. The Haudenosaunee consist of the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, and the Mohawks, and all of the clans are represented there. And in the middle is the tree of peace, the white pine with the eagle soaring overhead. And we'll come back to that later on in the presentation. So for a long, long time, these are the people who dwell here for many thousands of years. And then things start to change. In 1492, Columbus reaches the Caribbean. About 100 years later, the Half Moon sails up the Hudson River. And in the early 1700s, the colonizers are really beginning to clear extensively in the forest lands. So it's the early 1700s that the clearing is really getting started. And I want you to remember that number. Over time, most of the land has been cleared for farming. That takes about 150 years. And then 50 years later, the forests are, or 100 years later, the forests are regrowing, but now they're highly fragmented. There's a lot more people here now than there used to be, and they need places to live. Many invasive species are being introduced. And so what I want you to take away from this timeline is just how long our lands persisted in a fairly stable condition and just how quickly everything changed. 300 years from 1700 to the present. That's how long it took for the lands to be almost completely cleared of trees and for the trees to grow back after a lot of the farmlands were abandoned. And so keep that in mind as we're going through. Just the land has been through a lot in the last 300 years. Seems like a long time to a human because we don't live that long, but to the land, 300 years is a blink of an eye. So keep that in mind as we go through the next part of the presentation. Of course, I'm going back to Aldo Leopold, thinking about just how much change happened to those lands in that short period of time. As a steward of the land, we're concerned about the land health. And Leopold gives us a pretty good definition of what land health means. It's the capacity for self-renewal in the soils, waters, plants, and animals that collectively comprise the land. So again, he's reminding us that the community in question isn't just humans, it's everything. It's all the plants and animals in the soils. And so the health is defined as the capacity for self-renewal. And so you can see that our lands are resilient. You know, we do have a lot of forests now. We do have a pretty biodiverse community. It's not like it was before. The cast of characters has changed over time, but it is still a resilient land. And so that's why we're here tonight, is to learn how that we can think of ourselves as part of the land and become better stewards of the land. So let's talk a little bit about ecosystem services. A lot of ecological educators tell us not to use the phrase ecosystem services because it's too much of a buzzword and people don't understand what it means. But I think you guys are up to this though. So first of all, let's think about an ecosystem. Technical definition, this is off of the internet, a biological community of interacting organisms in their physical environment. So that's a lot of big words. Basically, when you think of an ecosystem, you're thinking not only of the plants and animals, the life forms that live there, the biotic components, in other words, but you're also considering the abiotic components, the minerals in the soil, the water that is circulating through the land in the water cycle. So another way to think of an ecosystem is just that it's a place and everything in it, all of the living things and all of the non-living things. So when we talk about ecosystem services, we're thinking about what does the land do for you? What kind of services is it providing? Not just for us, but for all other forms of life. So here's a graphic that I put together many years ago to show ecosystem services. There's a lot of buzzwords on this. We'll break them down in the next few slides. The thing I want you to appreciate here is that this photo was taken from the Stissing Mountain Fire Tower. I don't know if you have ever tried to take a photo of a piece of land that includes large forested hillsides, plus wetlands, plus a stream with a riparian buffer, plus some farmlands, but it's really hard to get that all in one shot. From the top of the fire tower though, it's possible. There it all is. So these are some ecosystem services. Think about the lands that are growing our food. Think about the animals that are pollinating some of those crop plants. The forests that are cleaning our air and mitigating floods. They're absorbing rainwater so that they don't become channelized and cause excessive flooding. Those forests are also generating our soils as The leaves come down every fall and they decay and they become part of the soil and enrich it with all those nutrients that the tree had taken into itself. Wetlands, cleaning the water and mitigating floods. They're absorbing a lot of water. So that's a one picture view of ecosystem services. But another way to understand them is to put them into categories. Now, there are too many words on this slide. Let's just take them one at a time. So the first type of ecosystem service is supporting services. And these are, it's just what it sounds like. These are the absolute foundation building blocks of life as we know it. This is the soils being formed by weathering of the bedrock and minerals and combining those with the decaying organic matter of our plants and animals. Forming the soils. This is our water cycle. This is nutrient cycling, nitrogen and other nutrients cycling through the soils into the plants, into the animals, and then back into the soils. And the one thing that makes all terrestrial life possible is photosynthesis. Plants are taking in carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, which we kind of need to breathe. And they're also building up a lot of biomass. They're being the base of the food chain. All the herbivores are eating those plants. So those are the supportive services. The next category is regulating services. Think of this as the mechanics and the plumbers and the HVAC techs and the civil engineers. These are the services that are cleaning the air and the water. They're keeping the lands from flooding too extensively by, absorbing water in wetlands and forests so that it doesn't run off too rapidly and cause damaging floods. The carbon storage in the plant community and the animal community and plant pollination. So those are all the regulating services, the kind of nitty-gritty active things that keep everything running. And then there's provisioning ecosystem services. This is an easier one to understand. All of the food that we eat and the fresh water that we drink are provided by nature. The timber that builds our homes and the fibers that we wear on our backs are all from the land. Genetic diversity, another kind of catchphrase that reminds you that organisms change over time, and having diversity, biodiversity, it's kind of like an immune system. So if one thing fails, something else will kick in and take care of that. Medicines, you don't always think about this. We think medicines come in pills, but in truth, a lot of them are nature-based. Aspirin, for example, is derived, or it's synthesized in a lab now, but it was originally in willow bark. Salicylic acid, which is a component of aspirin, and the genus of willow is Salix, which is where that name comes from. And the fourth type of ecosystem service is cultural. So this is something I think a lot of people can relate to now. Being cooped up, I think people are really appreciating the outdoors a lot more, the recreational availability of our lands that can sustain us. And I don't know about you, but going through the whole COVID lockdown, it was extremely comforting to me to be seeing spring happening outside my window. The daffodils still bloom, the warblers are still blowing through on their migration. The flowers are coming up, the gardens are getting planted. So that's a great example of the kind of services that the outdoors are providing to us at this time. Also spiritual significance and the cultural heritage. So remember I mentioned the Odonoshoni and the tree of peace, the white pine. So this tree has a great significance to these tribes. When long ago, the tribes were at war constantly and many warriors died, many families were torn apart. And it went on and all they knew was war until out of the west, Teganawida, the peacemaker, arrived, and through much effort it was able to have the tribes were able to agree to peace, and they met beneath a white pine tree, and Teganawida lifted the tree up, and there was a cavern underneath the roots, and they all threw their weapons into the hole under the tree, which supposedly is where we get the phrase "bury the hatchet," believe it or not. And so the white pine has a great significance in this culture. It's the tree of peace. And overhead is the eagle. The eagle soars over the tree of peace and In its talons, it clutches 5 arrows, 1 arrow to represent each of the 5 tribes. And the eagle is looking out for danger to warn the people as danger approaches. And remembering that to hold the 5 arrows together makes them harder to break. The tribes on their own would be easier to fall, but if they all stand together, you can't break a stick in a bundle. You've probably heard that expression. And so that's the cultural significance of this particular species of tree. It's a symbol of unity and peace. And so, many cultures have particular plants or animals that are their totems. And these are things that we can all kind of tie to as we relate to the outdoors. Okay, so the ecosystem services was a really big category. Let's go into a few more topics as we wind down here. Let's talk about scales. Now, if you were puzzled by the background photo, this is a joke. This is a close-up of a brook trout because fish have scales. Get it? Nah. Sorry. Okay, so consider spatial scale. It doesn't matter if you own 1/10 of an acre or if you own 100 acres or if you don't own any land at all. I'm a renter. I don't own land, but I live on this lovely little acre in Milan, and I consider myself a steward of the land. I've got trees and a garden and some flowers that I can take care of. So when you're considering the spatial scale, this is something that you'll be learning more about next week when we learn about some mapping utilities. But you need to consider your land on multiple scales. So think about the macro scale. Zoom out. This is in Google Earth. Zoom out to see what your land is part of. And is it part of a large contiguous forest? Is it part of an area of a lot of farmlands? So think about how your land fits into the landscape as a whole, and look at the areas around it, look at the topography and the interconnected resources of wetland complexes and large forest patches. So think of it as part of a larger system. Then there's also the Meso Scale, which is just what you see when you look out the window. This is the more common way to look at your land. No binoculars, no telescopes, just you and your eyeballs. So it's worth taking a look at the Meso Scale because you want to look in a little more detail. You're going to learn about some ways to identify the plants and animals that are on your land, how to map your land in terms of habitat type. So that's another approach to looking at your land. Think of that as your kind of everyday approach, is the Meso Scale. But also consider the micro scale. This is a lot of fun. It doesn't take a lot of money to buy yourself a decent hand lens or a magnifying glass. And when you do, just look at everything. The more you zoom in, the more you see. There is so much life there. And this is the bark of a red oak tree near my house. And you can see there's many different species of lichens and mosses growing on that tree trunk. So remember the spatial scale as you practice your mapping. So zoom in, zoom out, look at yourself as part of a larger landscape, and zoom in to identify as much as you can. So that's spatial scale. Let's take a second to think about temporal scale. Remember, life operates on different time scales. So a turtle might seem really slow to you, but it's like being in a race car for a snail. So remember that life forms that coexist with you on your land are either have much shorter or longer lifespans, and they kind of see the world a little bit differently in a lot of ways. So, whee, said the snail. Now, when we're thinking about temporal scale, you're also thinking about the lifespan of different organisms. Now, the average lifespan of a human is 79 years. This is a photo of my grandmother. She died 2 years ago at the age of 100, which proved what many of us suspected all along, which is that my grandma is above average. And so if you think about other life forms that are living on your land with you, the average human lifespan encompasses hundreds of butterfly lifespans and dozens of songbird lifespans. They'll have dozens of generations during your lifetime. But that oak tree that grows outside your window, your life is a fraction of its lifespan. So keep that in mind. If you're thinking of planting a butterfly garden, you don't want to plant just the plants that the butterflies like to pollinate. You also need to put in the plants that their caterpillars can eat. A lot of insects are very, very species specific about what their caterpillars can consume. If they're on a plant that they're not engineered to digest, they simply can't eat it, and they'll die before they metamorphose into an adult. So think about the different lifespans of the different animals that are and plants that are coexisting with you on your land. Patience. Patience is a really, really important part of land stewardship. When you work for Mother Nature, you get paid by Father Time. Sean, can we put up that poll really quickly? So, who said that? When you work for Mother Nature, you get paid by Father Time. I want to see how cultured you guys are.
Julie, are you able to see the results coming in?
Yeah, looks like a few people haven't voted yet.
Yep, just a few more.
You think that's about it?
Yeah, probably. All right.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Well, oh my, you guys disappointed me big time. Sorry. I didn't think that would be that hard. That was Judy Garland. That line is from a song that she sang in the movie Summer Stock. If you are feeling down about world events and pandemics and so forth right now, I strongly suggest you find that movie. It's a real winner. Judy Garland and Gene Kelly. I promise not to sing it to you, but the song, that particular song is called Howdy Neighbor. If you want to go to YouTube and just type in Howdy Neighbor Judy Garland, it'll come right up. She's driving a tractor, which I think is one of the coolest things she ever did. And that includes clicking those heels together 3 times. So yes, that is your little cultural nugget for the day. Do I just click on this to, okay, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. So, yeah, that's your little cultural quiz for the day. Uh-oh. Oops. No, it's not letting me advance the slides anymore. That's okay, I can just use the mouse. Okay, so much for culture. Let's go back to trees. The hands-on management work is really going to be talked about in detail in session 3, but I wanted to take a few minutes just to talk about trees. I figure everybody's got a tree. Even if you've only got 1/10 of an acre, you've probably got at least one tree that you need to look after. So let's run through some quick little facts on trees, because I figure this is something everybody's going to have in common. This is a tree. That doesn't surprise anybody. The thing that is a common misconception, you often see this drawn, the root system of a tree is a mirror image of the canopy of the tree. That is so not right. Sometimes you see it drawn like this, where the root system is actually smaller than the canopy. Oh my gosh, that's even worse. No, that is not how trees grow. It's true that some trees have taproots that go quite deep into the soil, but in most species of trees, the roots are actually much broader than you think. They actually extend beyond the canopy of the tree 2 or 3 times further than the branches do. And they also don't go as deep as you think they do. About 90% of the tree's roots are in the top foot of soil, and 95% are in the top 18 inches of soil. So keep this in mind as you are managing your lands. And the reason I'm bringing this up is just because tree roots are very susceptible to compaction. And so if you're driving or walking over an area, if there's a lot of traffic over the area where the tree roots grow, that's detrimental to the health of the tree. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're planning your stewardship activities. Those trees, they really need us to help them out a little bit. There's a lot of traffic in the world these days. So if you picture like a long-stemmed wine glass sitting on a dinner plate, that kind of gives you a picture of the proportion of the tree canopy to the root system. Now, anywhere you've got trees, you've got what we scientists like to call coarse woody debris, which is just a nice nerdy way of talking about the branches that fall to the ground from the tree. Now, this is not junk. This is good stuff. This is all these branches were formed by the tree taking in carbon dioxide, going through photosynthesis and turning it into sugars and tree tissues. And the tree's also taking up nutrients and water from the ground as it does that. So all of the material that makes up these branches came from the earth in some way, and now it gets to go back into the earth. So coarse woody debris, it's good for nutrient cycling, and actually there's a lot of biodiversity in there. When a tree dies, a standing dead tree makes great homes for woodpeckers and owls and all forms of life. I always like to say a dead tree is the most alive thing in the forest, because a dead tree is going to be colonized by all sorts of organisms. There are going to be fungi growing on it, a bunch of different kinds of fungi probably. There might be some of these tiny salamanders living under it. You can almost always find those redback salamanders when you roll over a dead log. Mosses, all different kinds of mosses, insects, and all of these creatures are actively breaking down the wood. They're actively taking that wood, which honestly is hard to break down. You think about it, if you wanted to chew on some wood, that wouldn't go so well. The lignin is very difficult to break down. And so these creatures are all breaking down the tree and returning it to the soil from whence it came. It's the best recycling in the world. And so because of the nutritive value of the fallen branches and the dead logs and so forth, there's no need to clean up the woods. If it's falling in your driveway or if it's going to fall on your car, by all means, clear it away. But you don't have to clean the woods. Mother Nature's taking care of that for you. And the fact that the coarse woody debris falls to the ground, you know, it's an example of nature recycling, and it's an example of a change that is a perfectly normal thing in the world. So the world is maintained by change, as Marcus Aurelius pointed out, in the elements and in the things they compose. I know change is hard. We humans don't always handle it very well, but it's how the world works. Change is the only thing that stays the same. You know that. So in the elements and in the things they compose, and I would just add to that, and in the things that they decompose, nature is always recycling. So thinking about the changes that occur naturally and the changes that you might make as a land steward, let's talk about change. Whenever there is a change, some species are going to benefit a lot, others might benefit a little. Some will be harmed a little, and others might be harmed a lot. Every single time something changes, this is true. There are organisms everywhere, even if they're bacteria that you can't see. They may be helped or harmed by your actions. So think about the concept of ecological trade-offs. When you're managing for a specific species, then that species is the winner. Other species may be losers because of that. So your job as a land steward is to kind of temper that reaction and try to work so that the losers don't lose too badly, unless the losers are things like the invasive species that you don't want. So for every change, there's a balance. There's some species that'll be winners and others that'll be losers. Now I'll run through a couple of examples of this. So here's a beaver dam. This is a very nice one. They are industrious creatures, to be sure. Now, when that beaver dammed up the stream and made this pond or lake, some species are going to benefit by that. The great blue heron's going to love it. It'll have a lot of new places to wade around and go fishing for fish or frogs or whatever it's having for dinner. This painted turtle is also going to benefit. It'll have, you know, a lot more habitat to swim around in, more logs to perch on in the sun. Whereas other species will be harmed. This white oak tree was drowned by the rising waters from that beaver dam. It wasn't helped along by the beaver stripping all the bark off the bottom of it either, as you can see. So that the many trees around there are all drowned. They were not able to get air exchange in their roots because the waters rose. And so those species were harmed by that beaver dam and died from it. Other species are harmed but might not die. They're a little more mobile. You know, a chipmunk might have had a burrow under that oak tree, but the chipmunk can move. It can make a burrow someplace else, but it's going to have to relocate. And the same thing with this ovenbird. This is a ground nester. And so if it had a nest near there, the nest might have been inundated. and it can brood another set of young this year, but that one brood is going to fail because the waters came for it. So another example is fragmentation. So I forget exactly where this is, but this is from somewhere in Dutchess County. And you can see how an area that is a fairly large contiguous forest is also somewhat broken up by a lot of houses. Now this is actually a pretty nice development. It's pretty compact, so there's a lot of houses in a small area. But what I'm looking at here is the fragmentation that's caused by that. And so when a large forest is broken up into chunks and fragments like that, some species are going to benefit by that. The white-tailed deer and the white-footed mice in particular love that kind of fragmentation. They really thrive in those areas where there's a lot of edge habitat, that boundary between the forests and the lawns or the field. Other species that need large areas of land to hunt and find food on might be harmed by having the forest broken up. They're not going to be able to find the prey that they need. So this bobcat and the fisher would be harmed by that fragmentation. And so because our land is so fragmented, we need to keep that in mind when we're considering our management plans. You often hear people say, well, I just want to let nature take its course. Nature is much wiser than I and can certainly manage the land better than I can. And honestly, that's probably true. But remember the timeline that we looked at back at the beginning. Remember what our land has been through in the last 300 years. It's kind of reeling from all of those very, very substantive changes that have happened. So this slide illustrates two issues that we're going to talk about at length in session 4, invasive species and deer populations. So you can see the invasive species here is Oriental bittersweet, which is strangling a couple of trees. And you can also see the effects of deer browse on the landscape. And I'm sure Mike is going to talk about this more in session 3. So the idea of letting nature take its course is a fine one, but these days nature needs a little bit of help. There is a lot of impacts on these lands now, and invasive species in particular are very prevalent in our area. Remember, invasives aren't evil. Humans always want to take sides and be on a team, but invasives aren't evil. Some of them are not that aggressive and not that harmful. Some of them are. And so that's something Joyce is going to talk about in session 3, is kind of how to pick your battles when you are dealing with invasive species, because it certainly is one of the largest challenges that landowners in our area face. Okay, another pop quiz. What do all of these things have in common? Anybody? What do you think?
Yeah, one person say round, layers.
Yeah, you guys got it. Yes.
Layers.
Layers. Lots of things have layers. Anybody who was confused by the chicken, I just need to point out that chickens are layers. Sorry. So yeah, lots of things have layers. Cakes have layers. Hamburgers have layers. And so does the land. Think about the biotic pyramid with the soil at the base, and then the plants, and then the animals that eat plants, and the animals that eat animals, all the way up through the omnivores and carnivores to apex predators. So the land has layers on it. And everybody who knows me knows I'm really excited about soils. We are not going to teach you how to use the soils mapper. It's a little too complex for what we're doing. But there is such a thing as a web soil survey, which is done by the USDA. So if you wanted to go to this website and find out what soil type you have, that would certainly be a worthwhile endeavor. So I just want to run you through a quick example of why we care about soils. These are 2 different soil types that exist in Dutchess County. And you probably have never heard of them. Most people haven't. But because I'm lucky enough to work at the DLC, where I get to immerse myself in the soil handbook from time to time, I can tell you a lot of things about the land based on these soil types. I know that an area that's got whale and silt loam is relatively flat. And I know that the Nassau-Cardigan complex is going to be in a steep rocky place. And because I know that, I can take a guess at the habitat type that might exist there. So the whale and silt loam is likely to support a freshwater emergent wetland or a marsh, whereas the Nassau-Cardigan complex is more likely to have an upland hardwood forest on it. And because I know that, I can guess as to the plant communities that might exist there. And because I know that, I can take a guess as to what types of animal communities might live in that area, all because I know that soil type. And you don't have to start with the soil, you can start with the topography and the habitat type. But the point is that there are so many linkages and there's so many interrelationships ecologically in the land. And so I'm going to wrap up with a few quotes. You know me and my Leopold quotes. So thinking about the layers of the land, think about that biotic pyramid. Land, then, is not merely soil. It is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. And that's a great way to visualize the land. It's a fountain of energy, and it all comes from the soil. It is life piled on life, which is a phrase. You can always leave it to Lord Alfred to turn a good phrase. This is from Tennyson's poem, Ulysses, which doesn't have anything at all to do with the land. It's just a cool phrase that I like. As describing what the land is like. It is life piled on life. Now, as if Tennyson wasn't enough for you, I'm going to give you a Shakespeare quote too. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Now, that's got zero to do with what we've just been talking about. What did I put that there for? Well, change a couple words. All the world's a stage and all the species in it merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one life in its time plays many parts. So think about the land. Think about what we talked about at the beginning, that the land has a cast of characters. Back during the Pleistocene, there were mastodons here in Dutchess County. Long ago, there were wolves. The wolves were hunted to extinction, and now we have coyotes. There weren't coyotes back then, but there are now. So those kind of did a little flip-flop. One went away and another one came in. Think about that changing cast of characters. Who exists now and who do you want to provide habitat for to persist into the future? All of those species are going to have entrances and exits. That's nature's way. And so think about the communities that you have. If there are species that are threatened or endangered, those are things that are likely to make an exit, a permanent exit someday. And you can make a difference in the choices of plants that you put around your house. Increasing the biodiversity and the availability of food and resources for those species. And one life in its time plays many parts. Think about the oak tree that grows outside my living room window. To me, it's kind of a friend. It's there every day and it shades the house in the summertime and it's just nice to look at. To the squirrels, it's home. They build their nests in it. It's food for them. To the caterpillars that are crawling over that oak tree right now, it's not just breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's 11sies and afternoon tea and bedtime snack. It's just a constant source of food. To the seedlings that are growing up underneath it, it's mom. That's the next generation coming up. So all these different species, every individual organism plays multiple roles. You know, it's eat or be eaten. And most things in nature are going to end their lives by getting eaten by something else. That's just how nature works. And so think about this cast of characters and think about the story that you want your land to tell. We've learned how to figure out the story that the land can tell us about the past. Think about what story you want your land to tell to future generations. Now that's hard. We've talked a lot about some really, really complex things. How are you going to make these decisions? Everything is so complicated. You mean if I make a change, I might harm some bacteria and that would be bad? How am I going to figure all this out? Well, yes, nature is complex. And it's true that we humans really like simple yes, no answers. And it's true that when you're talking about land management, the answer is usually, it depends. It depends on your soil type, it depends on your slope, and it depends on your aspect, it depends on your plant communities. So it's true, the answer is always it depends, but when you're trying to make a choice, here are some words to keep in mind. And again, we'll defer to the great Aldo Leopold for our closing quote. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So when you're making choices and deciding how to manage and steward your land, keep that in mind. It'll always guide you in the right direction. Any questions? Or are we ready to go into a break?
No, that's great. Thank you, Julie. Really excellent presentation and great way to kind of wrap it up, cover the history of the land and really, you know, how that affects the land that we manage today. So really appreciate that. We are going to take a 5-minute break, and if people do have questions for Julie, feel free to type in the chat box, or there's the raise hand function below if you raise it, and one of us can allow you to speak if you do it that way. Either way, if not, feel free to take 5 minutes, get stretch your legs out, get a quick drink of water, and we'll be back at 7:25.
Should I stop my screen share, John?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Hi, Rosemary. Yep, just saw your question there. We are recording these, and we will be putting them up on the website. The link I sent out to you all via email. I'll share that here again as well. But yep, we will be recording them to watch later. It might be, you know, a day or two until they get up there. We have to process them a little bit, but they will be up there. And also got the question if we can share the list of participants. Yes, we will share that list as well. All right, we'll get started in just one more minute. All right. Michelle, you there?
Yes, I'm here, Sean.
All right. Great. So welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a second to stretch a little bit. Try to keep that going through these sessions, just to break up. 2 hours is a long time to sit, so and look at a screen. We recognize that, so be sure to kind of keep those going. So with that, we'll transition into the second part of the evening tonight, and I'd like to introduce my colleague at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, Michelle Gluck. Michelle is a resource educator as well, part of the environment and energy team with me and my other colleagues there. And Michelle will be leading us through kind of a guided activity that will be up for kind of the homework for this session, and really kind of the basis for starting to look at your own properties and consider what management goals you might have, and starting to look at kind of the larger concepts and the larger issues. And then again, as I mentioned, we'll work on narrowing that down to some more specific management techniques. So with that, Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. All right. I think it's this one. All right. Sean, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yep, looks great.
All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you and to start our first activity of our Learn Your Land series. And Julie, that was an awesome presentation, and I loved all the quotes. So let's get started. So we're going to do a property management brainstorm activity. This is the first time we're doing this sort of activity, especially virtually. So definitely, bear with me, and we'll see how it goes together. So I would like you all to just take a look at this property that you see here on the screen. It's a 3-acre parcel in Dutchess County. We're going to troubleshoot kind of what areas of concern or management issues that you think may be existing on this property. Think about some of what Julie mentioned in her presentation with how land has been altered over time. Think about issues that might be occurring on your own properties, because the chances are they're likely occurring on this property as well. And ideally you do want to be walking through in person and making observations, but just do what you can with the image. And I'm asking that you post responses in the chat box. You can actually start doing that now if you like, and I'm going to keep talking through a little and give you a little bit more background context.
Yeah, we already got one suggestion, a lot of lawn to water / manage.
Awesome, exactly, yeah, great. So yeah, and Sean will be telling me your comments because I can't see them directly. So the image you're looking at now, kind of, Julie had talked previously about different scales. So we're zooming out a little bit more to the neighborhood. And as Julie had mentioned also, historically, a lot of land in Dutchess County was farmed. And then, you know, turned into residential, some of it. So you can see there is some larger parcels and farmland surrounding this parcel. The parcel's outlined in red, but it's a little denser section of 3-acre zone parcels. The green signifies a water feature. So in this case, this long linear green line is a creek. And then you can also see some wetland areas, you know, maybe a water body such as a pond. So what's interesting about this area is that you can see the brown, that's all, you know, forested area, backyard. So you have a road and then, you know, houses, their backyards, the creek, more backyards, and then another road. So this you know, patchwork of forest kind of makes up a wildlife corridor. Slightly, but again, like, I mean, you do see some forest fragmentation as Julie had mentioned, that occurs a lot. So definitely when you're going through your own observations and inventories, it's important to take a step back and look at the surrounding areas beyond just your immediate boundaries. And this image is taken from Dutchess County Parcel Access, which you will be learning about in session 2 and how to use its features. And then I just want to mention topography. You know, steep slopes can be one of the challenges that we're working with. And in this case, this property is situated on a hill. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, this image is also from Parcel Access. So you can see topography of a land area. So where these dashed lines are wider apart, like there's more space in between them, that's a flatter area. And then when they're closer together, that's a steeper area. That's as much map reading and topography lesson as I'm going to give you. It's not my area of expertise. Okay, back to the parcel. I just wanted to mention that, so the image you see here is taken from Google Maps. This is more updated than the next image I'm going to show you, which is from Parcel Access again, but so you can see there's no trees here on the upper left section of the property, but in the next image there are going to be trees, but we're gonna get into that section later, so I just want you to pretend that, just know there are no trees there.
Yeah, and that was one of the comments a few people made, you know,
Yeah.
salt runoff, stormwater from the road. Into
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, you guys are good. All right, but this is the image we're going to be using going forward. Because you can see the creek here, and it's, you know, in a sense more accurate in other ways. Awesome, so Sean, yeah, again, keep putting your thoughts on what management issues are going on into the chat box. Sean, do we have any more? Can you read off kind of like what's coming in so far?
Sure. Yep. So yeah, the you know, a lot of lawn damage, the salt road salt runoff, stormwater runoff issue, but also just more generally drought, habitat loss. We had a question asking contiguous pollinator pathway ? Then also some other issues, mice, deer, other edge animals creating incursion into lawn area, ticks, lawn is sterile compared to forest.
Yeah.
And then deer being another, obviously,
Great.
issue. Yep.
Yeah.
About so the slide where you showed the topo lines, are the lines the septic field? I didn't see that in that slide. He asked if the lines were the septic fields. I'm not sure.
These lines, maybe, or the boxes?
He's talking about in Google Maps. So I'm sorry.
Okay.
So in the Google Maps image.
Oh no, they're not.
Yeah, no, those are just from mowing, I think, right?
Yeah, just mowing.
Yeah.
Okay, but good observation and question. That is important to note, that you want to know, if possible, where, you know, septic and infrastructure is on your property before you do anything. Great. So, full disclosure, this actually is the property I live on, and there's a lot of concerns and management issues. So we're going to be using it. So my husband and I actually went through this brainstorming activity that you're all going to be doing on your properties. And this is the list that we came up with, which many of the points you've already been hitting, and continue to keep typing up if you get other ideas into the chat box. So the lawn, lots of lawn on this property, lots of invasive species, which many of you have brought up as a main priority and goal to remediate. We have the creek and the riparian buffer, but anyway, this is the list we came up with, and we're going to work through some of these issues. So to start, too much lawn. This is an image, of the lawn as it is. And then throughout the whole property, we have invasive species. This is just an image of what it looks like down in the woods behind the house. I actually took all these pictures yesterday, so it's real time. So we have a big problem. If anyone wants to type into the chat box, if you can ID that invasive species, feel free. But it is garlic mustard. And so Joyce is going to teach you a lot more about invasive species, but you can see they just take over and kind of choke out other species. And then this is barberry, a lot of barberry. And another thing I just wanted to point out briefly is that having a lot of invasive species on your property, sometimes you miss seeing other species of concern, such as this is poison ivy. And you also can't point out some of those beautiful, natives that are hiding amongst the invasives. And Sean, feel free to let me know if there's any questions or comments that come up.
Yep.
Yeah.
The only, some people did say garlic mustard.
Awesome.
Joyce also wanted to point out just that poison ivy is a native.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. It is a native, just something you want to be aware of. Right. Yeah. I've already gotten it a couple times this year. Good point. Does anyone want to give a guess at, I've circled an area on the property, why I circled that area, or what might be going on there, what it is?
We got transitions, margin zone.
Awesome, exactly.
Transition.
Yep, it's an unmanaged transition area. So this is an image of that area. And it's kind of tricky because, this is an area where, when you're managing your lawn, you might bring a mower there and mow over it. It's an area that a lot of invasives might take over because there's a gap there, but it's also a very important area. So knowing what to do there, which you'll get some more tips on, I think, in session 3. What about down here? Or I don't know, I shouldn't say down there, but in the, I guess, northeastern part of the property that I've circled. What's a management issue or concern that might be there, being that it's the creek?
Yeah, that green, just as a reminder, that green is a stream there. So we got, stream bed, marshy, riparian buffer, wetness, runoff, creek erosion, yep.
Awesome, yep, unhealthy riparian buffer. This is an image of that area. There's barberry just right up against the creek, kind of overshadowing it, choking it out. Over on the left side, it's kind of hard to tell, but you have a lot of garlic mustard, and then there's a bare area, which, some erosion is likely occurring. And then I just wanted to show you, this was my walk to get to the creek. It's a mess. It's all barberry, multiflora rose. So, but the creek is beautiful. It's a really, nice amenity and asset of the property, yet it's hard to access. So that kind of speaks to some of the ecosystem services that Julie mentioned. So that's another issue with invasives sometimes, is it prevents you from accessing those areas. And then also just, this is a big issue here. Moving on, anyone want to guess at why I circled, this forested area of the property?
Question about the deer pressure in the area?
Mm-hmm. Right on. Yeah, you guys are great, really insightful. So it's an unhealthy forest understory. This is what it looks like, likely from deer coming through and just nibbling on everything. Also, you can see all that greenery is just garlic mustard. It's invasive. So, and this is, we've started to pull some of the garlic mustard, but keeping in mind that when you pull an invasive, you really want to plant something in its place, or else it's just going to come back or it's left bare. But a lot of this is likely from, well, I don't want to say, but possibly deer or previous owners maybe, clearing it. And as Julie had mentioned in her presentation, a lot of our forests used to be farmland, so they're really disturbed and maybe not as healthy, but there should be understory plantings here and not just like bare ground and then trees. You can also see that, stark difference of just bareness and then invasives down below. All right.
We got one question asking, do deer not eat garlic mustard?
Well, the deer on our property don't seem to like it. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I'm sure a few other people here could attest to that. Amy's saying they do not. And
yeah,
I believe her. I don't
believe her.
I have tons of it on my property and never see deer eating them. So
yeah. So any guesses of why I circled up by the road? And remember, these trees aren't here anymore.
So we got a question. Before you get to that one real quick, Michelle, we got a question. What type of understory plantings, what would be there in the understory naturally?
Well, I would definitely defer to some of our other presenters to answer this if they'd like in the chat box. Mm-hmm. Because it's this isn't my specialty, but maybe, I don't know, different
yeah, I mean it's wet down there, so I mean, spice bush, dogwood, shadbush, those kind of things. Yep, we got spice bush, witch hazel, young trees. Yep, all their good suggestions.
Yep. And so you'll be learning more about DEC Trees for Tribs, Buffer in a Bag programs in, I believe, session 3, and talking about this way more in right. But great questions.
So yep, we did get a couple responses to your question about this last one here. Road salt runoff, salt damage from road. Yep.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So there's no buffer between the land and the road.
Right.
Which causes, a lot of the issues of concern that you're all bringing up. This is what it looks like currently. We started to help mitigate this and planted a row of native shrubby willow varieties. So these should actually get up, they can get pretty tall, like up to 20 feet tall. We planted those last year.
Michelle, just coming in from the chat, just some more suggestions. Corylus cornuta,
Great.
mountain maple, native maple leaf viburnum, and then Mike Fargione also wrote in young seedlings from canopy trees.
Great idea. Yeah, that makes a good point. That you can, you know, if you have a lot of different seedlings on your property, why not transplant them to areas that need them? But good point. So down here, or not down, but in like, yeah, this area I circled here on the northern part of the property. Remember when we looked at the topography, this was a flat area. You can tell it's down like slope from the steep area. Any ideas of why I circled it as an issue? Kind of tricky maybe.
Wet, is it wet?
Yep. It's a wet area of the lawn.
Yep, drainage.
That's a view from above, but it's right down there. All right, in the interest of time, I might just breeze through some of these.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so next we have, I circled this area by the house. It's a shady area under the tree canopy. So there's a group of pine trees here, and underneath, you know, it's just really shady. It's compacted, probably because it's very close to the house, and just there's a lot of foot traffic there, maybe when the house is being built, you know, construction equipment, what have you, but not a lot grows there. We do have like azaleas and really nice mature rhododendron, but other than that, it's just the pine trees. And then this one's kind of probably hard to tell what's going on, but there's a very steep slope with compacted soil below the house. And that area is a retaining wall, and it's all mugwort. So I think mugwort's invasive, right? So that's an issue. So you can see all of these issues. It doesn't I'm not overwhelmed by it, but again, this is you want to get a sense of what is going on your property, and it just shows the potential for improvement, for being a good steward and bringing in, you know, supporting more of those ecosystem services through your efforts. And this is what it looks like when the land hasn't been, you know, managed properly, or you have, this is what it looks like when nature is like kind of taking its course a bit, I guess. All right, Sean, do you want to do the poll?
Yep. So which of these management issues might you prioritize remedying if it was property that you managed? You know, what concerns might you try to take care of first? Yeah, answers coming in.
Great. Awesome.
Yep. All right, a couple more seconds and then we'll close it. All right.
Cool. All right, so it looks like a lot of, you know, interest in managing or mitigating the invasive species and lawn. And then a mix of others, and then the transition areas. Great. I agree. All right, and then I can just X out of that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so of course, after you look at kind of what your issues are, then you move into the solutions and strategies and considerations. So that was our next step of our brainstorming. And so this is a list we came up with, you know, just replacing those invasive species and with natives, or not necessarily natives, but, you know, other beneficial plants. Creating a nature trail to the creek, etc. So some of what we've already starting to do, I just wanted to share with you as examples. The planting a living fence. This is in the very beginning stages, but just creating a shade garden in that area with plants that are suitable for that micro climate or area. This is just an idea for others. Just, if you have the space for it, composting, and then you have finished compost that you can use as a soil amendment on your property. Removing invasives on the hillsides and thinking about doing, pollinator gardens there. Stop mowing the lawn. So we're coming up with we're experimenting with the idea of just a micro meadow in some locations. And then if you, can have chickens where you live, that's just one idea of, for pest control to control, and then they help aerate the soil. And then as a replacement for lawn, vegetable garden. Then, are there any comments coming in?
Just a bunch of other suggestions. Yep, but all on the same line.
Yeah, feel free to type in more suggestions for those issues into the chat box. That's great, and we can aggregate those and maybe summarize them. Very helpful for me because of all of our issues.
Yeah, just two kind of related comments are saying, think the native species control and planting, or excuse me, think the invasive species control and planting of native should happen simultaneously.
Yep, good comment. And so thinking of all those strategies moves us into just prioritizing your goals and what you want to do, because I guess it can be a bit overwhelming, right? So this is just an example of the basic prioritization that you could do. Like you have your issue, then you can think about, is this a short-term goal or a long-term goal? Because we know that some of our challenges that we're working with are, time that you can invest in, monetary, how much it's going to cost, and that sort of thing. So I just gave some examples of some of the issues. And then if it's a short-term or long-term goal, like the buffer issue on the road was fairly simple because we just could order, shrubby willow plantings, put them in within 2 hours of planting, and then it's just watering them. So that was short term. Whereas invasive species removal is really intense. And if you have a lot, it can be like a very long-term project. So you'll all be doing something like this as we move along with these sessions. And yeah, that's really all I have for you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, again, encourage, so yeah, that's a great slide to leave up there for a second.
This one? Okay, yeah.
Encourage as we're moving along through this process, creating a prioritization with short-term and long-term goals like this might be a great, a great exercise to take for your own property. Just looking through the comments, again, we got a lot of people talking about their kind of decisions, why they chose those priorities. We got one suggestion saying, chose lawn because it's a good start, not an end. Getting rid of non-natives and planting with natives is a huge task, but oh so important.
Yeah.
Yep, we got a question about buffer in a bag and a response.
Great.
And Beth Russler will be giving a good overview of that on our third session. So yeah, that as well. All right.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. All right, well, yeah, thank you. And with that, I'll stop sharing and give it back to Sean.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting to the home stretch. Great. So that's pretty much the end of the kind of content for today. I just wanted to take a few minutes to kind of wrap up, summarize what we covered today, and introduce the homework for this session in between next session. So I kind of just wanted to put up this diagram just to kind of visualize where we're trying to get to. So before today, we kind of hopefully took some time with the pre-webinar homework to kind of think about some of your goals, maybe come up with a vision statement for it. Getting to step 2 today, we learned more about stewardship and what that means, and what we'll do as part of the activity on your own time is doing a basic sketch of your property, and kind of doing what Michelle did, and starting with a really basic overlay of what you have, and then we'll continue through getting more details and some more ideas on how we might manage it. So we'll be getting through to hopefully to eventually to step 5, where you'll hopefully take these plans and realize those goals, and then continue to reassess and maintain. So again, kind of what we're working towards. These are some pictures that I took from a guy I have called The Woods in Your Backyard, a similar program to this. Again, this is kind of what we'd eventually like to get to. These are some really nice sketches, and encourage you to do your sketching and your mapping however you find easier, whether that's on paper or if you're good with the computer and you have a way of doing it that way. Feel free to do that. Again, kind of getting down to considering, project priorities, schedules, and details. This is an example of something you could consider doing for your property. And then also another part of the homework activity that I wanted to mention. So considering Julie's talk and what it meant to be a steward of the land, we discussed this a little bit today, and we got some really great explanations in the chat box. But feel free to kind of think this through a little bit more in depth, and this will be laid out in the homework, which I'll send out to everybody. But what does it mean to you? How might you incorporate some of these concepts into your own management? Have any of your goals changed? You might have had some ideas earlier on in your life, or even just before today, but those those change as you acquire new knowledge. So maybe consider that. And then are there new ideas that you may have not considered before that Michelle or others might have, other attendees in the chat box might have stirred up in your mind. So again, for the activity, for the sketch, I'd say start small. It can be done on paper, but again, if you prefer to do it some other way, feel free to do it that way. For this kind of first activity, we will get into more detail. We'll be adding more to this, but this is kind of a good example of what to include, right? So just kind of your basic property boundaries, if there are roads, structures such as your house, if you have a shed or a garage, a garden, streams and water bodies, and then some basic vegetation zones. So if you have a tree area or shrub area, and we can get down to the more nitty-gritty identification later on as we go. Again, we touched on this a good amount, and we'll touch on it in even more detail in the next session, but use maps as your aids. There's tons of great mapping resources that at your disposal. Google Maps, Bing Maps, Google Earth. In Dutchess County, we have a great tool called the Parcel Access, but a lot of other counties have similar parcel mappers. And for this exercise, we encourage you to take a walk, go out and walk your property. We have some time at home now, so it's as Julie mentioned, we're taking more notice of these things, and now's a perfect time to get outside and spend some time with your family or by yourself, and start looking at what you have. Take better notice of these kind of things. So consider abiotic features, and then also biotic features. And with that, I'll wrap it up. I have Julie and Michelle's contact information here if anyone has questions for them offline. But I just wanted to, again, I mentioned for next week, session 2, we will be getting into identifying, inventorying, and mapping. Nate and Marty Cyrus from DEC Hudson River Estuary Program and myself will be taking the lead on that discussion. So wanted to thank you all and hope this was useful for you. Wanted to encourage you, I will be following up to you all with an email with quick evaluation. We'll have a kind of a more final one at the end of the whole session, but we appreciate, take a few minutes to fill out those evaluations, just as they really help us kind of inform what to cover for the next session. So Again, really thank you all for sticking with us through this first one, and look forward to talking to you all again next week. Same time, same day. It'll be June 9th, 6 to 8. So thank you very much.